How can the most powerful empire in history fall without anyone pushing it? For hundreds of years, Rome was way more than just a city. It was the center of the whole world, the symbol of order, strength, and what it meant to be civilized. Its armies seemed like they could never lose. Its emperors seemed like they would live forever. But what looked like it would last forever was actually about to break apart. It wasn't a sudden attack. It wasn't a stronger enemy. It was a slow, never-stopping, and painful rot from the inside. The real enemy didn't come from far away. It was already living right there inside the city's own walls. Today, we're going to retell the story of how Rome, the city where people believed gods walked among men, was brought down to silence by the very people it used to look down on. The Visigoths, the Vandals, and the most scary of them all, Attila, the scourge of God. Get ready for a journey full of big dreams, total collapse, and the end of an age that changed the story of humanity forever. But before we start, subscribe to the History channel so you don't miss our upcoming adventures. And tell us in the comments, which other empire would you like to see fall in the next video? Alright historians, it's time to march on Rome. For hundreds of years, Rome wasn't just a capital city. It was the heart of the whole world, the beating center of total power. Its white marble columns showed off the glory of an empire that truly believed it would last forever. In its open squares, big speeches were made that changed the fate of entire nations. Its armies crossed continents like the whole world belonged to them by the will of the gods. Rome was unbeatable. Rome was immortal. But this isn't a story about glory. This is a story about falling apart. Imagine walking down those stone-paved streets surrounded by temples built for Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. Imagine feeling the power of a civilization that ruled everywhere, from the cold islands of Britain all the way to the hot sands of Egypt. In the Colosseum, the crowd went wild as gladiators fought and bled for honor, while the Senate argued with the kind of arrogance that comes from people who think they can never lose. And yet, that same marble that decorated the temples would soon be broken to pieces. The statues of emperors, once treated like half-gods, would end up lying smashed in the dirt, and the city that taught the whole world what power meant would one day bow down before the very people it used to call barbarians. Because Rome didn't fall in one night. Its unraveling was like an echo that went on and on for generations, an open wound that never got better. And at the center of it all was the eternal city itself, watching its own greatness and suffering because of its own pride. This chapter is the beginning of a story about an empire falling apart. There won't be clear good guys or simple bad guys, just a civilization that flew so high it forgot how to keep its feet on the ground. And while the barbarians were still living in their faraway villages, the real danger was already walking right inside Rome's walls. What can destroy a city that was built by the gods? You're about to find out. While the borders of the Roman Empire were barely holding on, the real collapse was already quietly happening at its core. What had once been a great system of organization, discipline, and loyalty had turned into a machine eaten away by greed, laziness, and political chaos, and nobody seemed able to stop it. The economy, which for hundreds of years had kept entire armies fed and built giant buildings, started to crack. The farmland, worn out from too many years of heavy farming, couldn't grow enough food anymore. Gold coins were replaced with coins worth way less, which caused prices to shoot up like crazy. Taxes went up with no mercy, and small farmers who couldn't pay just walked away from their land and went looking for protection from rich and powerful landowners. And just like that, without anyone really noticing, the seed of what would later become feudalism was planted. But the decay went way beyond money problems. The rich and powerful Romans, the ones who used to put the good of the empire above everything, got caught up in a never-ending fight for power. Every ambitious general started seeing the emperor's throne as something he could take for himself, not as a job given to him to serve the people. Between the years 235 and 284 AD, more than 20 emperors sat on the throne, and a lot of them were killed by their own soldiers. The empire wasn't being led anymore. It was being fought over like leftover scraps. The streets of Rome, which used to stand for order and doing the right thing, were now seeing riots, looting by insiders, and a population that had completely lost faith. Corruption dripped down from the palaces all the way into the armies. Soldiers weren't fighting for honor anymore. They were just trying to stay alive. And the enemy, even though still far away, could already smell weakness in the air. Rome still looked powerful from the outside, but its soul was broken, because empires don't always fall because of invaders. Sometimes they collapse because they stop believing in themselves, because they forget what made them great in the first place. And while the walls were still standing, the real collapse had already started on the inside. What if I told you that the very men who once promised to protect Rome would be the ones to open the doors to its destruction? For hundreds of years, the Roman armies had stood for order, power, and imperial pride. But over time, keeping that massive army going became too expensive and too hard. Problems inside the empire, fewer resources, and the fact that regular Roman citizens didn't want to serve anymore forced Rome to make a desperate decision: to hire its former enemies to defend it. That's how the Visigoths, Vandals, Suevi, and other Germanic peoples crossed the borders, not as invaders, but as allies. They were given land, food, and a place inside the empire in return for their fighting skills. Some came with their whole families. Others came with stories of hunger and being pushed around. What Rome saw as a smart solution would soon turn into a deadly mistake. The word barbarian was a Roman label for anyone who didn't live by Roman rules. But a lot of these people actually had complex cultures, organized power structures, and deep-rooted values. They weren't savages, they were survivors. Because the people Rome called barbarians, they didn't forget. They didn't forget the times Rome had burned down their villages. They didn't forget the taxes, the betrayals, the massacres. And even though many of them tried to fit in, learning Latin, wearing Roman clothes, worshipping Roman gods, they were always treated like outsiders, like a quiet threat. The Visigoths in particular felt that contradiction really hard. They were treated with total disrespect by Roman government workers, pushed into hunger and humiliation. So they decided that if they couldn't be part of the empire, then they would tear it apart from the inside. Their leader, Alaric, was no savage. He was a smart strategist, and he could see that Rome, even though it still stood on its 7 hills, was more vulnerable than it had ever been. Borders didn't mean much anymore, because the enemy wasn't marching down from the north. The enemy was already inside the Roman camps, leading Roman troops, learning Roman strategies, and waiting for exactly the right moment. And when that moment came, they didn't need to climb over the walls. They just had to stop following orders. Out across the wide eastern steppes, where the wind blows over the bones of ancient warriors, a figure appeared, wrapped in legend and fear. Attila, the scourge of God. He wasn't Roman. He wasn't a Visigoth. He wasn't a Vandal. He was a Hun. And his name, when said out loud by emperors and poor farmers alike, made people shake like they were hearing something almost holy. Unlike the Germanic peoples who wanted land inside the empire, the Huns didn't want to become part of Rome. They wanted to crush it. Their goal wasn't to join, it was to destroy. Wherever the Huns rode, nothing was left standing. Whole cities disappeared from the map, fields burned, rivers ran red with blood. And right at the center of this storm was Attila, a leader who didn't talk much, but who everyone obeyed without question. To the Romans, Attila was something they couldn't figure out. He didn't respond to diplomacy. He couldn't be bought with gold, at least not for long. He didn't care about crowns, temples, or fancy titles. His only goal was to break the will of people who thought they were unbeatable. In the year 451, the Western Roman armies joined up with the Visigoths. Yes, the same people who had once been enemies, and faced Attila at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains. It was a slaughter, like nothing seen before. Even though Attila's march forward was stopped, it wasn't a clear win. The scourge of God pulled back, but he was not defeated. A year later, Attila marched straight toward Italy. Cities ran in fear before he even showed up. Rome was shaking. Pope Leo I went out to meet him face to face. Nobody knows for sure what they said to each other. What we do know is that Attila turned around and left. He didn't sack Rome. He didn't destroy the heart of the empire. Maybe it was superstition. Maybe it was sickness. Or maybe because it wasn't even necessary anymore. Rome was already dying from the inside. Attila didn't conquer Rome, but he made Rome feel real fear. And sometimes fear is more powerful than any sword. For hundreds of years, Rome had been the most prized place in the world. Its walls seemed like nothing could break through them. Its emperors seemed untouchable. For many people, the very idea that Rome could be sacked, looted, and attacked felt like saying something that shouldn't even be spoken out loud. But in the year 410, that unthinkable thing became real. Alaric, king of the Visigoths, crossed through the gates of the Eternal City. He didn't smash them down. He didn't burn them. They were opened because the Romans themselves could no longer protect them. For 3 whole days, Rome was given over to total chaos. The fancy homes of nobles were looted. Temples were disrespected. Streets filled with terror. The people, who had gotten so used to looking down on the so-called barbarians, were now begging those same people to spare their lives. The empire that had conquered half the world fell before its own former allies. But that wasn't the only blow. Almost 50 years later, in 455, a new nightmare arrived. The Vandals. This time the attack was more organized, more brutal. They loaded ships with treasures, statues, and sacred objects. The gold from hundreds of years of conquest sailed away toward the African horizon and was never seen again. Rome was no longer the capital of the world. It was just a looted shadow, hurt, humiliated, and yet the city didn't disappear. Its stones were still there. So was its history, but its spirit had given up. In 476, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer removed the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire, Romulus Augustulus, from power. There was no great battle, no heroic last stand, just an uncomfortable silence, as if Rome had finally accepted that its time was done. The empire that had lasted for more than 1,000 years faded away without any glory. Rome didn't fall with a big crash. It fell with a quiet sigh, and the world was never the same again. The imperial eagles no longer flew above the walls. Rome's flags, symbols of total power, lay flat on the ground. But the end of the Western Roman Empire wasn't the end of everything. It was the beginning of something new, something uncertain, messy, and chaotic. Instead of one big authority in charge, Europe broke apart into pieces. In the empty space where power used to be, Germanic kingdoms popped up where Roman provinces used to stand. The Visigoths started their own kingdom on the Iberian Peninsula. The Vandals took control of North Africa. The Ostrogoths settled in Italy. The old Roman order got replaced by shaky alliances, never-ending wars, and a brand new way of organizing society, feudalism. But Rome didn't just disappear. Its roads, its laws, its language, all of these survived in one way or another. In monasteries, monks carefully copied ancient books so that knowledge wouldn't be lost. In cities, the ruins were used as places to get building materials and as shelters. Stones that used to form temples were turned into Christian churches. Christianity, which Roman emperors had once hunted down and persecuted, became the backbone of the New World Order. The church took over Rome's spiritual authority, and over time, its political power too. The Pope took on a role that not even the old Roman consuls could have imagined. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, kept going for almost another 1,000 years, keeping part of the Roman legacy alive. But the West, the original home of Rome, sank into what historians would later call the Middle Ages. The fall of Rome wasn't just the collapse of a city or a government. It was a giant earthquake in human history. It marked the end of the ancient world and the beginning of a whole new era. Because sometimes, for something new to be born, The old things have to burn all the way down to the ground. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this video and love this kind of content, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming videos and discover more amazing stories. See you in the next video.